The dust of the Black Hills settled on everything, a fine, gritty shroud coating broken dreams and bitter hearts. For 3 sisters, it was the dust of their own graves dug by the calloused hands of their father. He wasn't just a man who had lost his way in the feverish pursuit of gold. He was a man who had lost his soul. And in the dim, whiskey-soaked light of a deadwood saloon, he sold his own flesh and blood. 3 daughters traded like cattle to men whose wealth was matched only by their cruelty. This isn't just a story of the West. It's the story of Serafina Isabella and Clementine, and how they would have to claw their way back from the brink, aided by strangers, from a world their father taught them to fear, in a land that demanded blood for every inch of freedom. The year is 1876. The air in the Dakota Territory is thick with the scent of pine, gunpowder, and avarice. The Great Sioux War rages a bloody consequence of the white man's insatiable hunger for the gold shimmering in the sacred Paha Sapa, the Black Hills. For the Lakota, it is a fight for their very existence. For men like Elias Thorne, it is a landscape of last chances and bitter disappointments. Elias had come to the Black Hills with a pickaxe in his hand and visions of gilded streams. He found only dust rock and the slow, grinding erosion of his spirit. His wife, a gentle soul who had followed him into this wilderness, had withered under the harsh sun, and his even harsher moods, leaving him with 3 daughters who were living, breathing reminders of his failure. They were his burdens, his shame, and now his final desperate commodity. Serafina, the eldest at 20, bore the weight of her sister's world on her slender shoulders. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, missed nothing. She was a pragmatist, her heart encased in a fortress of her own making. She remembered her mother's laughter, a sound as alien in their small, dilapidated cabin as the song of a meadowlark in a coyote's den. Every day, she fought a silent war against the encroaching despair, her love for her sisters the only weapon she possessed. Isabella, 2 years younger, was the keeper of their mother's gentle spirit. She moved with a quiet grace, her hands possessing a preternatural skill for mending torn clothes and soothing fevers with herbal remedies gleaned from the land. She saw beauty where others saw desolation in the resilient purple of a prairie crocus, or the intricate patterns of frost on a window pane. Her dreams were her sanctuary, fragile things she shielded from the abrasive reality of their lives. Clementine, the youngest at 16, was a spark of defiance in the suffocating darkness. Her hair, the color of a sunset, was as wild as her spirit. She met her father's drunken rages, not with fear, but with a simmering fury of her own. She was quick-witted and sharp-tongued, her rebellious nature a constant source of friction in the tense confines of their home. The men who would come to own them were the antithesis of everything the sisters represented. Silas Croft and Mortimer Hagan were not prospectors who toiled in the dirt. They were barons men who had built an empire on the sweat and shattered hopes of others. Their homestake mine, a gaping maw carved into the heart of the Black Hills near Deadwood, was a testament to their ambition and their ruthlessness. It was a place that devoured men, spitting out gold for its masters. Silas Croft, known in hushed tones as the Vulture, was a man of sharp angles and colder eyes. He was tall and more thin, his face a predatory landscape of a beak-like nose and a cruel slash of a mouth. He saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, and he had decided that wives, or rather presentable women, to adorn his new opulent residence in the burgeoning town, were an asset he required. Mortimer Mort Hagen was Croft's shadow. A man whose bulk was composed of equal parts muscle and menace. He was a brute, his face a road map of barroom brawls, his knuckles scarred and permanently swollen. Where Croft was the calculating mind, Hagen was the blunt instrument of their shared will. The transaction, when it happened, was as swift as it was brutal. Elias Thorne, deep in his cups at a grimy Deadwood tavern, saw Croft and Hagen enter their expensive coats, parting a path through the throng of rough miners. He saw his chance a grotesque parody of a business opportunity. Fueled by cheap whiskey and a lifetime of self-loathing, he approached their table. Serafina and Clementine had been sent to town for meager supplies, a task Serafina dreaded as it exposed them to the leering eyes of the miners. As they passed the saloon, the swing doors opened, and they heard their father's slurred voice, loud and boastful. 3 of 'em, strong, healthy. The eldest is a fine cook, the middle one is gentle, and the youngest, well, she's got fire. Tame her, and you'll have a real prize. Serafina froze her hand, gripping the rough canvas of the supply sack. Clementine's face went pale, her usual defiance momentarily extinguished by a cold dread. They watched hidden in the shadows of the boardwalk as Silas Croft's lips curled into a semblance of a smile. And the price for these prizes? Croft asked, his voice a low sneer. Elias Thorne, a man selling his own children, named a figure so insultingly low it amounted to little more than the cost of a few good horses. A pouch of gold dust, not even nuggets, was tossed onto the table. The deal was struck. Hagen lumbered out of the saloon, a cruel grin splitting his face. He saw the 2 sisters huddled in the shadows. Well, well, look what we have here. Half the merchandise already delivered. Clementine's shock erupted into fury. You leave us alone, you pig! She spat, her small frame trembling with rage. Hagen laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He backhanded her the force of the blow, sending her sprawling into the dusty street. Serafina screamed, rushing to her sister's side, shielding her with her own body as Hagen loomed over them. You'll learn respect, he growled, his breath a foul mix of stale cigars and whiskey. All of you. He turned and went back inside, leaving the sisters in the dirt, the laughter from the saloon a chorus of their damnation. Serafina held her weeping sister, her own tears silent, her heart hardening into something sharp and dangerous. The fortress around her heart was not breaking. It was being reinforced with steel. The dust of the Black Hills no longer felt like the shroud of a grave. It felt like the ashes of a world she would burn to the ground to save her sisters. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. Croft and Hagen's men came to the Thorne cabin and escorted the sisters to their new home, a gaudily opulent mansion that stood on a hill overlooking the raw, muddy scar of Deadwood. It was a gilded cage, its velvet curtains and polished mahogany mocking their captivity. Isabella was taken to Croft's wing of the house, Serafina, and the still bruised Clementine to Hagen's. They were separated, their shared strength fractured. Silas Croft treated Isabella like a prized possession, parading her at dinner parties for his business associates, her silent beauty a testament to his power. He never laid a hand on her in anger, but his ownership was absolute, a constant, suffocating pressure. He controlled what she wore, what she ate, and who she spoke to. Her gentle spirit began to fray under the strain of his cold, possessive gaze. Mort Hagen's approach was cruder. He saw Serafina and Clementine as property to be broken. His attempts to tame Clementine were met with a defiant fury, that only seemed to amuse him, earning her confinement to her room for days on end. He directed his more sinister attentions toward Serafina, seeing in her quiet strength a challenge. She endured his clumsy, brutal advances with a stoic resolve that infuriated him, her mind a whirlwind of frantic, desperate escape plans. She learned the layout of the house, the schedules of the guards, her pragmatism now a tool for survival. Meanwhile, beyond the polluted air of the mining town in the deep, silent pines of the Paha Sapa, two pairs of eyes watched the movements of the Wasichu the White Man. They belonged to Thankar Wangbli, Great Eagle, and Chetang Sang, White Hawk brothers of the Oglala Lakota. Thayanj Ka, Wanj Blai, was a man forged in the crucible of his people's struggle. His face was a testament to the harsh beauty of the plains, his eyes holding the wisdom of a leader and the sorrow of a man watching his world die. He had fought at the Rosebud against General Crook and knew the scent of a battlefield. The encroaching mines were a desecration, a poison seeping into the heart of their sacred land. His mission was not one of blind rage, but of strategic disruption. He sought to understand the enemy, to find the cracks in their armor, to sever the head of the snake rather than hacking at its coils. Chetang Sang was the wind to his brother's mountain. Younger, faster, his movements were as fluid and silent as the hawk for which he was named. He was a master tracker, his senses alive to the subtle language of the forest. Where his brother saw strategy, Chetang Sang saw the immediate injustice, the raw wound on the land and its people. A fire burned in his heart, a righteous anger that Thankar Wangbli constantly had to temper with his own measured counsel. They were scouting the homestake operation, observing the flow of wagons, the placement of guards, their purpose to find a weakness that could be exploited to slow the tide of destruction. It was during one of these scouting missions that their paths crossed unseen with the fate of the three sisters. From a ridge overlooking Deadwood, they watched the gaudy mansion. They saw the heavily armed guards, the opulent carriages, the sheer arrogance of the structure. It was the heart of the town's corruption, the palace of the men, profiting most from the rape of the Paha Sapa. One afternoon, their attention was drawn to a lone figure in the mansion's garden. It was Isabella. Croft had allowed her a small patch of land to tend an insignificant concession he believed would keep her docile. For Isabella, it was a lifeline to the living world, a place where she could feel the soil between her fingers and coax life from the earth. She was gathering herbs, her movements filled with a grace that seemed out of place in this brutal landscape. As she worked, one of Hagen's guards, a beefy man with a cruel streak, approached her. He made a crude remark, his words slurring with drink. Isabella ignored him, her back stiffening. The guard, angered by her silence, grabbed a handful of the delicate herbs she had collected and crushed them in his fist. "When a man speaks to you, you answer," he snarled, shoving her. Isabella stumbled, falling to her knees, her carefully gathered plants scattered in the dirt. Tears of frustration and helplessness welled in her eyes. From the ridge, Chetang Sang felt a surge of fury. He saw not just a white woman being mistreated, he saw the same arrogance, the same casual cruelty the Wasichu showed to his own people, to the land itself. He saw a fragile, beautiful thing being trampled under a dirty boot. He drew his bow, an arrow knocked in a single, fluid motion. Thankar Wangbli placed a firm hand on his brother's arm. "No," he said, his voice low and steady. "Not yet." A single dead guard brings a swarm. That is not our way. Watch. Learn. Chetang. Sang reluctantly lowered his bow, but his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, remained fixed on the scene. He saw the guard swagger away, laughing. He saw Isabella alone and defeated, slowly gathering her scattered herbs. Something in her quiet resilience, in the gentle way she tried to salvage the crushed leaves, resonated deep within him. Days later, their mission led them closer to the town's perimeter. Chetang. Sang was tracking a supply wagon route when he saw Isabella again. She had ventured just beyond the garden near a small creek at the edge of the property, seeking a specific type of root she knew grew near water. She was alone, a momentary lapse in the guard's vigilance. Remembering his brother's counsel, but compelled by an impulse he didn't fully understand, he moved. Silently he descended from the rocks, his moccasins making no sound on the pine needles. He appeared before her, not as a threat, but as a shadow-given form. Isabella gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. She had been taught to fear the savages of the hills, but the man before her did not match the monstrous descriptions. He was young, his face serious, his dark eyes holding an intensity that was startling, but not cruel. He held out his hand. In his palm lay a perfect, unblemished wild turnip, its leaves still fresh. He said nothing. He simply offered the food. Trembling Isabella looked from the turnip to his face. She saw no menace there, only a quiet dignity. She slowly reached out and took it, her fingers brushing his. The brief contact was like a spark of warmth in the chilling cold of her existence. Chetang. Sang gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then, as silently as he had appeared, he melted back into the trees. Isabella was left standing by the creek, the wild turnip clutched in her hand. It was more than food. It was a message. It was a seed of hope planted in the barren ground of her despair. She knew with a certainty that defied logic that she was not as alone as she had thought. The shadow of the hawk had touched her life, and with it came the first faint promise of a dawn. The seed of hope planted by Chetang Sang's small act of kindness began to sprout in the suffocating confines of the Croft-Hagen mansion. Isabella, her spirit buoyed, managed to secretly communicate with Serafina during a rare, supervised meeting in the grand hallway. Using a system of subtle gestures and coded words they had developed as children, she relayed her encounter. A silent man from the hills, an offering, a flicker of possibility. For Serafina, it was the first crack in the seemingly impenetrable walls of their prison, an outside element, an unknown variable. Her pragmatic mind, which had been tirelessly mapping the guards' routines and the mansion's layout, now had a new crucial piece of information. There were potential allies in the hills, the very people their captors feared. The plan she had been formulating, a desperate, half-formed thing, began to solidify. It would be insanely risky. But the alternative, a slow, soul-crushing subjugation, was unthinkable. The opportunity came during a lavish party hosted by Croft to celebrate a new lucrative smelting process. The mansion was ablaze with light, filled with overdressed magnates from the east, and their wives, the air thick with cigar smoke and self-congratulation. Security was heightened, but the guards were also distracted, their attention divided between protecting the perimeter and sneaking gulps of stolen champagne. This was the night. Serafina conveyed the plan to her sisters in a series of hushed whispers and urgent glances. Clementine, who had been feigning a sullen obedience that lulled Hagen into a false sense of victory, felt her rebellious fire rekindle into a roaring blaze. Isabella, though terrified, drew strength from the memory of the kind eyes in the forest. The plan had 3 parts. Clementine, using the fiery temperament that was her curse and her gift, would create the diversion. Isabella, with her gentle, unassuming nature, would acquire the tools, and Serafina, the strategist, would lead the escape. As the party reached its drunken crescendo, Clementine enacted her role with terrifying conviction. She stormed into the main hall, where Hagen was boasting to a group of investors, her face a mask of fury. She hurled a tray of expensive glassware to the floor, the shattering sound momentarily silencing the cacophony. "I will not be your slave!" She shrieked, her voice raw with genuine pain and manufactured hysteria. The ensuing chaos was perfect. Hagen, his face purple with rage and embarrassment, grabbed her, dragging her from the hall as guards rushed to contain the scene. The primary threat, Hagen, was now occupied. During the commotion, Isabella slipped away. Her target was the small infirmary, where she had been allowed to organize medical supplies. With trembling hands, she pocketed laudanum from the medicine cabinet and a small, sharp surgical knife meant for lancing boils. But in her mind, a weapon. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but the image of the crushed herbs and the hawk-eyed man who had offered her a turnip gave her a strange, chilling calm. Meanwhile, Serafina moved toward the kitchens. She knew a brutish guard named Alistair was stationed at the back door, a man with a notorious weakness for food and drink. With a feigned timidity, she offered him a plate of leftover roast beef and a bottle of whiskey she'd managed to pilfer, secretly laced with a heavy dose of Isabella's laudanum. She watched her nerves stretched taut as he greedily devoured the offering. Within 20 minutes, he was slumped in his chair, snoring loudly. Serafina unbolted the kitchen door. The cool night air was the first breath of freedom she'd taken in weeks. She found Isabella hiding in the shadows of the pantry, the knife and laudanum clutched in her hand. Their final challenge was freeing Clementine, who was locked in her room on the 2nd floor. They crept up the back staircase, the sounds of the party providing cover for their movements. The guard outside Clementine's door was distracted, peering over the banister at the spectacle below. Serafina approached him from behind. "Mr. Croft requires your assistance downstairs," she said, her voice steady and authoritative. The guard, recognizing her as one of the mistresses of the house, hesitated for only a second before lumbering down the stairs. Serafina picked the simple lock on her sister's door with a hairpin, a skill learned from a misspent youth prying into her father's locked drawers. Clementine was inside her face, streaked with tears, but her eyes burning with triumph. "It worked," she whispered. The descent was fraught with peril. They used the servants' passages, their hearts stopping at every distant footstep. They finally slipped out the now unguarded kitchen door and into the vast, intimidating darkness of the Black Hills. They ran fueled by adrenaline and terror, their fine house slippers no match for the rocky, unforgiving terrain. The sounds of the party faded behind them, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the pounding of their own blood in their ears. They didn't have to wait long for the alarm to be raised. A furious roar from the mansion, which Serafina recognized as Hagen's, echoed through the hills, followed by the frantic barking of dogs. The chase was on. They were city-soft, their lungs burning, their ankles twisting on loose stones. They had no supplies, no weapons beyond a tiny knife, and no real sense of direction beyond a way. Hope began to dwindle as the sounds of the pursuit hoofbeats and shouting men grew closer. Just as despair threatened to consume them, 2 figures emerged from the shadows of the pines ahead. They were tall and silent, armed with bows and rifles. The sisters froze, terror seizing them. Were these new captors? But then Isabella gasped. She recognized the younger of the 2 men. It was Chetang Sang. His face was grim, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a flicker of recognition. Thang Ka Wangbli stepped forward. He looked at the 3 terrified, exhausted women. "They are hunting you," he said, his English measured and deep. It was not a question. "Yes," Serafina breathed, stepping in front of her sisters. "Can you help us?" Thang Ka Wangbli's gaze was assessing, taking in their torn dresses and terrified faces. He saw not just helpless women, but fugitives from the same enemy that was poisoning his land. Helping them was a risk, but leaving them to be captured was an offense to his spirit. "We will take you to a place where their dogs cannot follow," he said. He turned and led them deeper into the woods. Chetang Sang, taking up the rear, his rifle held at the ready. He led them not on a trail, but through a series of winding game paths and across a rushing creek, the cold water masking their scent from the pursuing hounds. Their destination was a place known to the Lakota as Wakang Tipi, the sacred cave. The entrance was narrow, hidden behind a curtain of ancient moss and tangled roots, a place no white man would ever find by chance. Inside, the air was cool and still. Thanj Ka Wanj Blai lit a small, smokeless fire, its light dancing on the cave walls, which were covered in ancient pictographs of hunts and spirits. Here in this sanctuary of his ancestors, the vast cultural chasm between the Lakota brothers and the Thorn sisters became starkly apparent. They were from 2 different worlds, brought together by a shared enemy. As the sounds of the pursuit faded into the distance, a tense silence settled over the small group. Clementine eyed the brothers with suspicion, Isabella with a fearful curiosity, and Serafina with a calculated gratitude. They were safe for now. But as the firelight flickered, casting long shadows on the painted walls, Serafina knew this was not the end of their flight. It was the beginning of a fragile, dangerous alliance, forged in darkness and desperation in the sacred heart of the Paha Sapa. The sanctuary of the sacred cave, the Wakang Thipi, became a world unto itself. Outside Croft and Hagen's hired tracker, the relentless Lefebvre cast a wide, methodical net across the hills. But inside the cool, damp dark, the only world that mattered was the one illuminated by the small, smokeless fire, a space so intimate it was both a shelter and a pressure cooker. The 5 occupants, plucked from entirely different realities, were bound together by a shared enemy, yet separated by a chasm of experience, prejudice, and language. The passage of days was marked not by the sun, but by the subtle rhythms of their confinement. The quiet sharing of dried meat and gathered roots, the hiss and crackle of the fire, the long, tense silences where the only sound was their own breathing. The air was thick with unspoken thoughts. Thang Ka Wangbli, a man of immense patience, understood that this crucible could either fuse them together or shatter them entirely. He saw it as his duty to be the smith. He began to speak, his deep, measured voice filling the silence. He gestured to the ancient pictographs that adorned the walls, their red and black pigments, telling stories that predated the first white man's footfall in these hills. He didn't just translate. He wove the tales into the air. He told them of the Tatanka, the great buffalo, who gave his flesh so the people might live a story of sacrifice and sacred connection. He spoke of Iktomi, the trickster, whose cleverness and folly taught lessons of humility and the dangers of ego. He wanted them to understand that the Paha Sapa was not a collection of rock and timber to be exploited, but a living, breathing entity, the heart of his people's spirit. Serafina listened with an intensity that went beyond mere curiosity. Her pragmatic mind absorbed every detail, not just as folklore, but as tactical intelligence. She learned which plants were poisonous, which streams ran year-round, which valleys held echoes. She was learning the language of the land from its master, and in her mind, she began to overlay this new map onto her own knowledge of her enemy's world. Isabella listened with her heart. The stories resonated with the half-forgotten lessons of her mother, the belief that every living thing possessed a spirit. She would watch Thang Ka Wangbli's hands as he spoke, seeing a reverence there that she had only ever seen in her mother's tending of her garden. She quietly tended to the fading bruise on Clementine's cheek with a cool poultice of moss. Her gentle actions, a silent counterpoint to the harsh reality of their situation. Chetang. Sang remained a bastion of hostile silence. He saw the sisters as a contamination, a physical embodiment of the disease that was killing his world. He would sit for hours cleaning his rifle, sharpening his knife, his movements precise and angry. The memory of Isabella, her quiet dignity as the guard crushed her herbs, was a flicker of confusion in the inferno of his rage, a contradiction he could not yet reconcile. It was Clementine, her fiery spirit chafing against the claustrophobic inaction, who finally broke the tension. After days of pacing the confines of the cave like a caged animal, she whirled on Chetang Sang. "Why do you stare at us like that?" she demanded, her voice sharp and echoing. "Why do you hate us so much? We are not your enemy." Chetang Sang slowly looked up from his knife, his dark eyes burning with a cold fire. "Not my enemy," he repeated, his voice a low growl. "Your people's greed is a plague. The men you fled, they are but a symptom. They build their gaudy house on the bones of Lakota children. They poison our water to wash their yellow metal. You wear their clothes, you speak their words, you eat their food. You are a part of their world, a world that is strangling mine." "We bled in that world," Clementine shot back, her hands clenched into fists. "It bought us, beat us, and would have broken us. That house was our prison, not our home. We hate Silas Croft and Mort Hagen with every breath in our bodies. That should be enough for you." "Hate is easy." Chetang. Sang countered, rising to his feet, his height casting an imposing shadow. "But you do not understand what they are destroying. You weep for your own cage, but you have never wept for these mountains." The air crackled thick with a confrontation that was about more than just their immediate predicament. It was the collision of two histories of suffering. Before Thang Ka Wangbli could intervene, Isabella spoke, her voice not loud, but so clear and pure it cut through the anger. "He is right," she said softly, looking at her sister before turning her gaze to Chetang Sang. "We have not wept for these mountains. We did not know we had to." She took a hesitant step forward. "My mother, before she died, told me that a person's spirit is like a fire. Some burn hot and fast like Clementine's. Some burn low and steady like a good campfire. But she said my father's fire had gone out, and that all he had left was smoke and bitterness. The men who bought us, they have no fire at all, only a cold emptiness that they try to fill with gold." She looked directly into Chetang Sang's eyes. "Your fire burns hot. I see it. It is the fire of a man protecting his home. It is a good fire." Her words a simple acknowledgement of his pain, and the righteousness of his anger accomplished what 1,000 arguments could not. They found the crack in his armor of rage. The fury in Chetang Gisang's eyes did not vanish, but it was banked, replaced by a flicker of startled comprehension. He looked at this gentle woman, who spoke of spirits and fires, and saw not an enemy, but another soul, who understood loss. He gave a curt nod, and returned to his vigil at the cave's entrance, his silence now more thoughtful than hostile. The fragile truce was shattered the following afternoon by the return of Thang Ka Wangbli. He slipped into the cave like a ghost, but the grim set of his jaw and the urgency in his eyes spoke volumes. "Lefebvre is close," he announced, his voice low. "His skill is great. He knows the old ways. But that is not all. I found tracks leading away from the main search party. A single rider on a tired horse heading toward the site of your old cabin." A cold dread settled over the sisters. "Our father," Serafina whispered the words, tasting like ash. The image of him drunk and boastful in the saloon was seared into her memory. Betrayal seemed not just possible, but inevitable. It was this threat, this imminent danger, that finally galvanized Serafina's resolve. The passive strategy of hiding was a luxury they could no longer afford. Her mind, always working, always calculating, saw a new path forward. It was a terrifying, audacious path, but it was the only one that led to true freedom. "We can't keep running," she declared, her voice ringing with a newfound authority that made everyone turn. "Escaping is not enough. They will never stop hunting us. We have to stop them. We have to break them." She looked at Thang Ka Wangbli, her eyes blazing. "You want to hurt their operation. I want to utterly destroy it. For weeks I was a prisoner in that house, but I was not deaf. I listened to their drunken boasts, their business dealings. I know about their payroll wagons, their fraudulent land claims filed in Cheyenne, the investors they have swindled. Their weaknesses are not just here in these hills. They are on paper in ledgers in bank vaults. We have the knowledge to ruin them." A new light dawned in Thang Ka Wangbli's eyes. He saw the truth of her words. This was no longer just a rescue. It was the birth of a war council, a fusion of two worlds. Her intimate knowledge of the enemy's infrastructure and his mastery of the land could be a devastating combination. Just as they began to speak of a plan, a sound from the cave's entrance made them all freeze. A figure stumbled through the narrow opening, collapsing to the floor in a ragged, sobbing heap. It was Elias Thorne. He was a ghost of the man they knew, ravaged by more than just alcohol. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild with a tormented guilt. Clementine let out a hiss of pure contempt. Serafina stood rigid, her face a mask of stone. But it was Isabella who saw the profound brokenness in him and felt a flicker of pity. "He found me," Elias rasped, clawing at the cave floor. "Lefebvre. He offered me gold, more gold than I've ever seen, to tell him where you might go." He looked up, his face a mess of tears and dirt. "I told him to go to hell." He began to sob, great wrenching sounds of a soul cracking apart. "I led him wrong, sent him into the ghost owl basin. But he'll figure it out. He's coming." Then through his tears he gave them the key. Before I did what I did, I heard Croft. He was talking to Hagen, bragging about a secret shipment, blasting powder, far more than is legal. Not for the main mine, but for a new tunnel in a narrow canyon south of here, a place that cuts under treaty land. This was it, the final piece. Not just fraud, but a direct explosive violation of federal treaty law. The kind of crime that would bring the army down on them, that would utterly annihilate their operation. Elias Thorne, his confession spent, looked at the daughters he had wronged. "Let me fix it," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Let me lead Lefebvre on one last chase. A real one this time. I can buy you a day. Maybe more." It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. Than Ka. Wan Jablai looked at the broken man, saw the desperate sincerity in his eyes, and gave a slow, solemn nod. As Elias Thorne staggered out of the cave to meet his fate, a profound silence fell. The ghost of their past had delivered their future. The sisters and the brothers looked at each other, the last vestiges of mistrust burned away. The chasm between them had been closed. They were no longer Lakota warriors and white fugitives. They were an alliance of the wounded, a single unified storm, gathering its strength in the sacred heart of the Paha Sapa, ready to unleash a righteous and terrible reckoning. The canyon was a tomb waiting for its occupants. The air, still and cold in the pre-dawn hours, carried the ancient scent of pine, damp earth and stone. High above, a sliver of moon cast a ghostly pallor on the sheer rock walls that rose like silent, judgmental gods on either side, creating a natural choke point, a place designed for ambush and finality. This was the location Elias Thorne had spoken of, with his dying breath of conscience, the secret heart of Croft and Hagen's arrogant ambition. And it was here, in this stark cathedral of rock, that the final battle would be fought. The alliance forged in desperation, and now honed into a cohesive weapon, moved with the grim purpose of executioners. They had spent the last hours of darkness in silent preparation, a ghostly ballet in the shadows. Every member had their part to play, their individual strengths woven into a single deadly tapestry. Thang Ka Wang Bli. His presence, a calm, centering force, was the mind of their operation. His strategy was not one of brute force, but of turning the enemy's own power, their own environment against them. He had walked the canyon's length, his hand brushing the cold stone, feeling its energy, listening to its whispered secrets. He knew where the rock was weakest, where the fire would spread fastest, where the echoes would create the most terror. Serafina stood watch near him, her gaze fixed on the canyon mouth. The pragmatist in her had calculated the odds, the risks, the potential points of failure. But beneath the cold logic, a furnace of pure righteous anger burned. She thought of her father, a ghost now, who had led Lefebvre and his posse on a futile chase into the deep wilderness, a final tragic act of redemption. A complex grief, sharp and painful, twisted in her heart, not for the drunkard who sold them, but for the man he might have been, for the love he had squandered. That grief now hardened into resolve. She was no longer just a protector. She was an instrument of a justice this land had never offered. A short distance away, Clementine and Chetang Sang were a study in focused energy. The fiery, rebellious girl and the stoic, silent warrior had found a strange, unspoken understanding. They had worked together through the night, their movements synchronized, setting snares and scouting every possible escape route for their quarry. A grudging respect had formed between them, born from shared purpose and a recognition of the warrior spirit in each other. Clementine clutched a heavy rifle, liberated from one of Hagen's own men. It felt solid and real in her hands. The memory of Hagen's blow to her face was a hot coal in her gut, and she yearned for the moment she could face him not as a cowering victim, but as a reckoning. Isabella, the keeper of their mother's gentle spirit, was perhaps the most transformed. In the shelter of an overhanging ledge, she worked methodically her hands that were so skilled at mending and healing, now preparing instruments of destruction. She bundled rags, soaked them in oil, and tied them with twine. Each bundle was a prayer and a curse. She remembered the cold, possessive way Croft had displayed her like a porcelain doll, the deadness in his eyes. She remembered the guard crushing her herbs, a small act of casual cruelty that symbolized their entire worldview. To destroy, she now understood, could also be an act of preservation. By burning this one cancerous spot, she might allow something healthier to grow in its place. Her gentle heart had not broken. It had been forged into something new. Something as resilient and unyielding as the mountains around them. As the first hint of grey light began to dilute the darkness, Chetang Sang began his ascent. He moved up the sheer cliff face like a shadow detaching itself from the rock, his moccasined feet and bare hands finding purchase where it seemed none existed. He carried a small bundle containing the carefully measured charge and a long fuse. The climb was perilous. A single loose stone, a moment of lost concentration, would mean his death. But his focus was absolute. He was not just a warrior on a mission. He was an antibody, rising to cleanse a wound in the Paha Sapa. He reached the designated spot, a precarious ledge directly above the secret cache of wagons laden with barrels of black powder. Below, the canyon was still wrapped in shadow. He carefully placed the charge near the base of a precariously balanced rock slide Thang Ka Wang Bilai had identified a massive tonnage of stone held in place by little more than gravity and time. Then he waited, becoming one with the stone, his eyes scanning the canyon floor. The wait stretched into an eternity. Then they heard it, the clatter of hooves on stone, the rumble of voices full of arrogance. Silas Croft and Mortimer Hagan rode into the canyon, flanked by a dozen of their most brutal men. They were laughing, their voices sharp and ugly in the morning stillness. "By noon, we'll have blasted a hole straight through to the Devil's Own parlor." Hagan boomed, his voice echoing off the walls. Croft sneered, dismounting and striding toward the powder wagons. "This land was made to be broken, Mort, just like horses and women. It only understands a firm hand." He ran a gloved hand over one of the barrels, a look of greedy satisfaction on his face. They stood directly in the heart of the trap, utterly blind to the judgment waiting for them in the heights. From his perch, Chetang Sang saw his brother, hidden across the canyon, raise his arm. A single perfect eagle feather was held aloft, catching the first ray of sun. It was the signal. With a small flint striker, Chetang Sang struck a spark. The fuse hissed to life, a tiny, sputtering snake of fire. He didn't wait to watch. He immediately began his descent, moving with controlled urgency. The explosion was not the deafening roar the miners were anticipating. It was a sharp, splitting crack, like the world's largest whip, followed by a deep, groaning rumble from the very bowels of the mountain. The guards looked up, their faces a mixture of confusion and annoyance. The groan intensified, becoming a roar. The rock slide gave way. It was not an avalanche of snow, but a river of solid rock and earth, a tidal wave of stone that poured down the cliff face. It landed with a cataclysmic, ground-shaking impact that sealed the canyon's exit, completely raising a choking cloud of dust. Panic, primal and absolute, erupted. The guards, realizing they were trapped, began shouting, firing their rifles wildly at the shadows, their discipline shattered. "Ambush! It's the Sioux!" one of them screamed, his voice thin with terror. Before the dust had even begun to settle, the second phase commenced. From their concealed positions, Thang Ka Wang Bli and the sisters lit their oil-soaked bundles. One by one, they hurled them down into the canyon. They arced through the air like malevolent comets, landing in the dry brush and grass around the wagons. The fire took hold instantly, erupting into a terrifying wall of orange and yellow flame. The heat was immense, the smoke thick and acrid. The fire spread with terrifying speed, penning the panicked men in cutting them off from their panicked horses, boxing them in between a wall of rock and a wall of flame. "My powder!" Croft shrieked, his carefully constructed composure dissolving into raw terror as he saw the flames leaping hungrily toward his precious barrels. This was the moment. The final act. Out of the swirling smoke, like vengeful spirits emerging from the underworld, the three sisters appeared. They stood on a rock ledge just above the canyon floor, silhouetted against the fire, their faces masks of cold fury. Seraphina's voice, clear and cutting, sliced through the chaos. "It's over, Croft!" she yelled, her words echoing with chilling authority. "Your empire is finished. Your illegal claim, your fraud, your greed, it's all here. The proof is in those wagons, and it will all burn with you." Hagen, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, let out a guttural roar. He saw Clementine, saw the defiance in her eyes, and charged forward, yanking his heavy pistol from its holster. "I'll kill you, you little hellcat!" But Clementine was a different person from the girl he had beaten in the street. Her fear had been burned away, leaving only a core of cold, hard steel. She raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel, and fired. The shot was not aimed at his heart, but at his power. The bullet tore through Hagen's gun shoulder, shattering the bone. He screamed a high, agonized sound and collapsed to the ground, his pistol falling from his useless hand. Now there was only Croft, cowering near the wagons, and Isabella. The gentle sister, the healer, stepped forward, a single burning torch held high in her hand. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes filled not with hatred, but with a profound, sorrowful certainty. She looked directly at Silas Croft, the man who had tried to encase her spirit in velvet and silence. "You see people as things to be owned," she said, her voice trembling, but carrying an unshakable strength. "You tried to own this land. You tried to own us. But you can't own a spirit. And now you will own nothing but ashes." With a final resolute look at Seraphina and Clementine, a look that conveyed a world of shared pain and ultimate victory. Isabella threw the torch. It sailed through the thick, smoky air in a perfect fiery arc. It seemed to hang in the air for an eternity before landing squarely on the canvas cover of the lead wagon. The result was instantaneous, biblical. The wagon didn't just burn, it detonated. A colossal, silent flash of white light bleached all color from the world, followed a microsecond later by a physical blow, a wave of pure pressure that threw everyone to the ground. Then came the sound, a thunderous, earth-shattering roar that was felt as much as it was heard. A chain reaction followed wagon after wagon, erupting in a cataclysmic symphony of destruction. The canyon itself seemed to scream as a massive mushroom cloud of fire, smoke, and debris billowed toward the sky. A funeral pyre for an empire of greed, visible for 100 miles. In the ringing silence and chaos of the aftermath, the Alliance retreated. They moved with the same silent purpose with which they had arrived, melting back into the hills as the sounds of the approaching authorities, drawn by the colossal blast, began to echo in the distance. They didn't look back. they didn't need to. They carried the image of the fire in their eyes, the feeling of justice in their hearts. The reckoning was complete. Chunk. Conclusion. The story of the Thorn sisters and the Lakota brothers is a powerful reminder that heroes are often forged in the most desperate of circumstances. It's a tale of resilience against cruelty, of courage against overwhelming odds, and of the unexpected alliances that can light up the darkest of times. They fought not just for their own freedom, but for a sliver of justice in a lawless land, proving that the strongest bonds are not those of blood, but of a shared struggle for a better dawn. Their legacy isn't written in history books, but it's carried on the wind through the Black Hills, a whisper of defiance and hope. If their story of survival and fierce courage moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications so you don't miss our next journey into the untold stories of the past. And please share this video with someone who loves a tale of true grit. Thank you for listening.